Hey, HannahMouse1 here. Welcome to part 2 of my virtual pet scratch tutorial series. I know it's been a while, but I hope I can make it up to you because today this one is a biggie. At your request in a poll I ran a while back, we are adding in an arcade today with 3 basic minigames: Whack-a-Bug, Mouse Run, and Insect Invaders. These will allow you to earn money with which you are able to buy food and will ultimately be able to buy clothes for your pet or decorate your house. So let's dive right in. Just like last time, I'll leave a link to a version of the project down below that has all of the sprites but without the code, so you guys can code along with me, and this will also contain all of the code from the last episode. So I'll once again be time-lapsing through the artwork with a bit of commentary on the assumption that you'll be using that, but to show you my process if you did want to replicate it yourself, and there are timestamps on the screen if you don't feel like sitting through it. If you want a more detailed deep dive into sprite work in Scratch, I have a full tutorial on the Scratch vector editor, so you can check that out if you're interested. For this first batch of art, I made the map icon for the arcade, which I styled to look like a box of glow-in-the-dark paints, which I thought was a good way of combining the neon lights that I associate with arcades with the art supplies theme that we've got going on here. And I had to make a version of this with the place name on it for when the map icon is moused over. And then I created the background for the arcade, which of course looks like the inside of said box, complete with paint dripping from the ceiling, and I was sure to keep everything in line with the game's style, with a consistent colour palette and a strong cel-shaded aesthetic. And finally I made the art for the 3 arcade machines. The 3 mini games that I'll be showing you how to make today are based off of pretty classic mini games, but you guys told me that I should put a Hannah Mouse twist on it, so that's exactly what I'm doing. I also asked you guys what you want the bad guys to be in this game, and according to the poll you guys want the bad guys to be bugs, so that's what I'm going with. Although I did get some pretty fun non-insect suggestions as well, so I might have some extra villains, the sweet tooths to this game's strange glove, so to speak, if any of you are Moshi Monsters fans. But for the purposes of this episode, where I just need some generic bad guys for my minigames, we're going exclusively with the bugs. For the arcade machines, I tried to make them look like traditional arcade cabinets with buttons and joysticks, and I used the same colours as the ones I used on the glow-in-the-dark paints on the map icon and background for the sake of consistency. But let's jump in with the code, starting by getting the map icon and arcade to spawn in. So go to the map icon sprite and copy the switch costume 2 blocks and the create clone of myself blocks from the existing forever loop under the when I receive message 1 block. Change the costume to be arcade 1 and drag that into the script under the pre-existing create clone of myself block. This will get the map icon to show. Then scroll down to the when I start as a clone block and duplicate the if costume name contains grocery store else function. Change the new function to be if costume name contains arcade, and change the switch costume to grocery store 2 block to be arcade 2 and the switch costume to grocery store 1 to arcade 1. Drag this into the empty else function in the pre-existing code. This gives the arcade its mouse over effect. Then go to the when this sprite clicked function, duplicate the costume name contains grocery store else function from within this and change the function to be if costume name contains arcade. Drag this into the empty else function in the pre-existing code and change the set open block to set open to arcade, the switch backdrop block to arcade, and the broadcast block to new message arcade. The arcade map button now takes you to the arcade page. Go to the arcade machine sprite and drag in a when green flag clicked block. Attach a hide block to this. Then drag in a when I receive arcade message receiver and create custom block. Call it clone, select run without screen refresh and click OK. Drag a clone block into our message receiver. For our define block, attach a switch costume to Whack-a-Bug block and a go to x y block, setting the values to be x minus 130, y minus 50. Then add a repeat 3 times block. Add a change x by 130 block to this, and then add a create clone of myself and a next costume block, with the create clone block before this change x by block and the next costume block after. Then drag in a when I start as a clone block and attach a show block to this. Attach a forever loop under this. Drag an if function into this and drag a not operator into the condition space, and then an equals operator into the condition space of that. In the footage I forget the not operator, I fix that in just a sec, so bear with me. Set this to be if not open is equal to arcade. Within this function, delete this clone. After this function, add an if else function with the condition if touching mouse pointer. In the if portion, set the size to 110%, else set size to 100%, and this is where I added in that not operator that, as I just mentioned, I'd forgotten. The arcade machines now all spawn in. Oh, and I changed the size effect when machines are moused over from 110 to 105. Feel free to mess around with this and use whatever feels right to you. Then go to the icon sprite. Duplicate one of the when I receive message 1 blocks and change both the wait until open equals and not open equals conditions to arcade. Between these wait until blocks, make sure that the only 3 blocks are go to x minus 210, y 98, switch costume to exit, and create clone of myself. Change the y value in the go to block to be 150. We're now able to return from the arcade back to the map. Go back to the arcade machine sprite and drag in a when this sprite is clicked block. Drag in a set open to block and drag a costume name input into the input space. Attach this to the when this sprite is clicked block. Add a switch backdrop to block under this and add a costume name input into the input space, and then a broadcast block again with a costume name input in the input space. But let's move on to the first actual minigame, Whack-a-Bug. Of course, this is based off the game Whack-a-Mole, where you have to click the moles or bugs as it is in this case as they pop up. And as a bit of an added challenge, I'm going to be making each of these minigames within a single sprite. Something I've noticed is that beginners in Scratch tend to have separate sprites for absolutely everything to the point of redundancy, and it's something that I was definitely guilty of once upon a time. So while this is an extreme example, I want to show you how to be a bit more economical with your sprites. First though, we need some art, so if you want to skip, the timestamp is on screen for you. I created a backdrop for the game based on the art I did for the Whack-a-Bug arcade machine, with the bright magenta and yellow colour scheme, and then I did all of the art in a Whack-a-Bug sprite. I created a sprite for a hole, creating an animation for when the bug pops up or down, as well as a pop down animation where it looks a bit squashed for once you've whacked the bug. And I made the bug look like a plushie, so it doesn't look like you're hitting a live animal with a hammer. This is a bit less brutal, I think. I also created a start button, UI to display your final score, including sprites for each number 0 to 9, and 2 heart sprites, one lit up and one blacked out to display how many lives you have left. But onto the code. In the Whack-a-Bug sprite, add a when green flag is clicked block. Attach a hide block to this. Drag in a when I receive message receiver and set it to be new message Whack-a-Bug. No spaces but with each word capitalized. I don't know what's up with the footage here. I guess the computer lagged really badly during the recording and it jumps a bit. Sorry about that. Create a new block, call it clone, and make sure that run without screen refresh is selected. Attach one of these clone blocks to the message receiver. Create a variable for this sprite only called this type. Create another again for this sprite only called this value. Under clone, switch costume to start, and then drag in a go to XY block. Set this to be x0, y65, and then add it to our clone script. Then create clone of myself. Then switch costume to empty, aka the costume for a hole without a bug to whack. Drag in another go to xy block and set the values to be x minus 125, y minus 22. Add this to our script. Add another create clone of myself block after this. Duplicate these last 3 blocks, change the x value in the go to block to be positive 125, and add this to the end of our script. Duplicate the blocks again, this time with the values in the go to blocks being x minus 145, y minus 125, and attach it. Repeat this process one last time, this time with the values x positive 145, y minus 125. Drag in a when I start as a clone block and attach a show block to this. Add a set this type to size block to the start of our clone define script, with the input being start. After the first create clone of myself block, set this type to whole, drag in a forever loop. Back with our when I started a clone script, add an if else function to it. Add an equals operator to the condition space and set the condition to be this type is equal to start. Add a forever loop into the if portion. Add another if else function into this loop with the condition if touching mouse pointer. In the if portion, set size to 110%, else set size to 100%. Then add a set brightness effect block in both the if and else portions, with it being set to 10 in the if portion and 0 in the else portion. Add in a when this sprite clicked block and duplicate the if this type is equal to start function from the when I started a clone script. Attach this new function, removing the contents of the if portion to give us an empty function. Make a new block, call it clone2, and select run without screen refresh and click OK. Add a clone2 block to the if portion of our empty if else function. Under define clone2, set this type to score, then set this value to 1 and add a go to xy block with the values values x minus 170, y 60. Then add a repeat loop repeating 3 times, and within this loop create clone of myself. Change x by 23 and change this value by 1. Duplicate this entire script. Change the set this type block to set this type to heart, and the x value in the go to xy block to be 125. And at the end of the script, delete this clone. Back with the when I start as a clone script, duplicate the if this type is equal to start else function. Remove the contents of the forever loop and then insert this new function into the else portion of the pre-existing function. Change the condition to be if this type is equal to score. Make a new variable for all sprites called score. Under the clone2 define script, set score to 0, and back in the when I start as a clone script, add an if else function into the empty forever loop. Drag a greater than operator into the condition space and set the right hand side to 0. Drag a minus operator into the left hand side and a length of operator into the first input space of this. Set this to be length of score and drag another minus operator into the empty input space. Set this to be 3 minus this value. In the if portion, show, and in the else portion, hide. Drag in a switch costume 2 block, and for the input, drag in a letter blank of blank operator. Set the second input space to be score, and for the first, copy the length of score minus 3 minus this value block from the condition of the if else function, and just drag that in. Add this block after the show block in the if portion of the function. The score UI now displays the score. Make a new variable for all sprites called lives. Then duplicate the entire if this type is equal to score else function and change the condition to be if this type is equal to heart. Another error I made when I recorded this, I put lives instead of heart. Again, I catch this error later, so bear with me, I'm only human. Remove the contents of the inner if else function and change the condition to be lives is greater than this value. Remove the hide block from the else function, and in the if portion, switch costume to heart 1, else switch costume to heart 2. At the start of the clone2 define script, set lives to 3, and this is where I caught the error in the condition and switched it over. Under the clone2 define script, I changed the x value in the go to xy that sets the position for the first heart to 90, and the change x by block in the repeat loop to 35. Feel free to play around with that until it feels right. And if you're noticing that the final heart has the wrong costume, I did make another tiny error. The right hand side of the condition of the if else statement that sets the costume should be this value minus 1 rather than just this value. Create a new variable for all sprites called difficulty. At the start of the clone2 define script, set this to 1. Then add a broadcast new message start game block to the end of the script before the delete this clone block. Find the define clone script, and at the end of this, set this type to none. Add a when I receive start game block and attach an if function to this. Set the condition to be this type is equal to whole. Add a forever loop into this, and within this add a wait 0.02 seconds block. Then add an if else function with the condition lives is equal to 0. In the if portion, switch costume to empty, and then stop this script. For the else portion, add an if function with the condition costume name is equal to empty. Then create a new variable for this sprite only called this state. At the start of the clone define script, set this state to down. But back in the when I receive start game script, add in a if function with the condition pick random 1 to 20 is less than difficulty. Within this, set this state to up. Add an if else function below the if costume name is equal to empty function and set the condition to be if this state is equal to up. Add an if else function to the if portion with the condition costume name is equal to bug A2. Duplicate the if pick random 1 to 20 is less than difficulty function from within the if costume name is equal to empty function and drag this into the empty if function, changing the set this state to up block to be set this state to down, else next costume. Drag an if else function into the empty else function. Drag an or operator into the condition space with the left hand side being costume name is equal to bug A2 and the right being costume name is equal to bug A4. In the if portion, switch costume to costume number -1, and in the else portion, switch costume to empty. And I realized I made another slight error that we need to fix. Anywhere we have the code pick random 1 to 20 is less than difficulty should actually be pick random 0 to 20, not 1. And for the higher number, play around with it until you have the desired speed. I think I wound up at 50, but do whatever feels right to you. Go back to the when I receive start game script and drag an if function into the else portion of the final if else function before the switch costume to empty block. Set the condition to be if costume name is equal to bug A1, and within this change lives by -1. Then find the when this sprite clicked script and add an if function into the empty else function. Set the condition to be if this type is equal to hold. Add an if function for the condition. Set this to be if costume name is equal to bug A2 or bug A1, and within this add 2 next costume blocks and a set this state to down block and a change score by 1 block. Add an if function to the very end of the when I start as a game script and set the condition to be if this type is equal to none. Add a forever loop to this, and within this loop wait 5 seconds and change difficulty by 1. Drag in an if else function and move the 2 blocks from the forever loop into the else portion. Move the function into the now empty forever loop and set the condition to be lives is equal to 0. In the if portion, stop this script. Duplicate the if this type is equal to none function and remove all of the contents. Change the condition to be if this type is equal to heart and add a wait until block into this. We need this to read wait until lives is equal to 0. Then add in a delete this clone block and attach this function after the this type is equal to none function. Duplicate the this type is equal to heart function and set the condition to be this type is equal to score and remove the contents. Within this, change x by 150, and we actually still need the wait until lives is equal to 0 block, so you can add that back in. We shouldn't have deleted that. And I'm going to change the value in the change x by block to 200 for now, although I do play around with this again later. Drag in an if function, add an equals operator into the condition space, and move the function to be between the wait until lives is equal to 0 block and the delete this clone block within the this type is equal to heart function. Set the condition to be this value is equal to 1, and within this switch costume to you earned and add a go to xy block. Initially I set this to be x minus 90 y 60, but I do play around with that a bit later. After this, set this type to earn and create clone of myself. Duplicate this if this value is equal to 1 function. Within the copy, change the x value of the go to xy block to be 160, the costume to be coin, and the condition to be this value is equal to 2. Remove the delete this clone block and drag this function in after the if this value is equal to 1 function. And here I change the x value in the if this value is equal to 1 function to be minus 170, and the change x by block in the this type is equal to score function to 240, and these are the values I stuck with. After this, change x by block, wait 5 seconds, delete this clone, then go to the when I start as a clone script and add an if function into the empty else space. Set the condition to be this type is equal to earned and drag an if else function into this. Set the condition to be costume name is equal to you earned. Go to the clone 1 define script and duplicate the 4 blocks from set this type to start and drag them to the create clone of myself block, and drag that into the if portion of the function we just created. And we actually want this to be an if function, not an if else function, so transfer all of that over and add a change money by block into this function, setting the input of that to be score. After the function, delete this clone, and before the function, wait 5 seconds. Now go back to the icon sprite and duplicate the when I receive message 1 script that spawns the exit icon for the arcade. Change the wait until open is equal to arcade condition and the wait until not open is equal arcade condition to wait until open is equal to whack-a-bug and wait until not open is equal to whack-a-bug respectively. Find the when I start as a clone script. We need an if function with the condition being open is equal to whack-a-bug, and add this after the if not open is equal to this open function. Drag an if else function into this. Set the condition of this to be lives is equal to 0. In the if portion, show, else, hide. I do this the wrong way around in the footage, another error on my part, again I catch it a bit later. Go to the arcade machine sprite, find the when this sprite is clicked script, and under this set lives to 0. Back in the icon sprite, find the when this sprite clicks script and duplicate the if open is equal to food else function from within this. Change the condition of the copy to be if open is equal to whack-a-bug and set the set open block from the if portion to set open to arcade. Remove the set open to map block from the pre-existing if else function and drag the new function into the now empty else space. And this is where I fixed the show hide mix-up that I mentioned earlier. Go back to the whack-a-bug sprite, drag in a when I start as a clone block and attach a forever loop to this. Add an if function into that, setting the condition to be not open is equal to whack-a-bug. Within this function, delete this clone. Then go to the money sprite and find the when I start as a clone script. Drag an if else function into this and put this into the else portion before the if not costume name is equal to bar function, relocating the show block to the else portion of the function. Set the condition to be if open is equal to whack-a-bug. Drag an if else function into the if portion with the condition lives is equal to 0. In the if portion, show else hide. We actually want to move the if not costume name is equal to bar function to the else portion of the open is equal to whack-a-bug function after the show block, and we want to duplicate this and move it into the if portion of the if lives is equal to 0 else function. Then go back to the icon sprite and find the when this sprite is clicked script. Add a broadcast arcade block to where we set open to arcade and switch backdrop to arcade. And that's everything for the whack-a-bug game. Well done if you've gotten this far. Now let's move on to the second game, Mouse Run. This will be an endless runner where you have to dodge enemies and collect coins. But first, of course, we need to make some art, so be sure to skip to that timestamp if you're not interested in seeing my process. I made the arcade cabinet background before modifying the mouse costume and bug costume to create the game's player and enemies respectively, and for the player I made a simple running animation. I also made a left and right arrow button as well as a play button, and I took the UI for the lives and score from the whack-a-bug game and recolored the asset to fit into this game's color palette. Now onto the code. Add in a when green flag clicked block and attach a hide block to this. Add in a when I receive message receiver and set it to be new message mouse run. Create a new block called clone with run without screen refresh selected and attach one of these clone blocks to our message receiver. Now make two new variables, both for this sprite only, this type and this value, just like we did for whack-a-bug. And at this point I realised that I forgot one costume that this sprite needs, an overlay of the arcade machine frame, so I quickly threw that together. But for our clone define script we need a go to x y block with the values x0, y0 and a switch costume to frame block. Then create clone of myself. Drag in a when I start as a clone block and attach a show block to this. Duplicate the three blocks attached to the clone block. Change the y value in the go to xy block to be 35 and the costume in the switch costume to block to start. Attach these three blocks to the end of the clone script. Create another copy of these three blocks, this time with the go to values being x minus 60, y minus 90 and the costume being left arrow. Attach this and create one more copy, this time with the x of the go to block being 60 and the costume being right arrow. Feel free to mess around with the x values of the arrows. After playing around a bit I found that minus 30 for the left arrow and 30 for the right arrow was what felt right to me. Then add a set this value to 1 block to the end of the script. Then add a go to x y block with the values x minus 200, y minus 140. Then add a repeat 3 times loop, and in this loop create clone of myself, change this value by 1 and change x by 35. Copy everything from the set this value block and set the copy aside. Add in a switch costume to heart 1 block before the repeat loop. Then add a switch costume to coin block, a go to xy block and a create clone of myself block to the end of the script. And for the go to block, set the values to be x 93, y minus 140. Duplicate these three blocks, changing the costume block to be switch costume to 1. And then remove the go to block and create clone of myself blocks. In their place, attach the code we set aside earlier with the set value to 1 block and the repeat loop. And in the footage, I moved the change xy block within the loop to be at the start of the loop, but I end up moving it back, so you know, don't copy that. Attach this to the end of the clone script, and this is where I moved the change xy block back. Add another change xy block before the loop and play around with all of the x values until it looks and feels right. For the go to xy block before the coin is cloned, the x wound up at 120. The value of the first change x by block wound up at 40 and the one in the loop wound up at 25. I also altered the coin costume to be slightly smaller, although if you're using the sample project this obviously won't affect you, it will already be at the right size. Drag in a set this type block and set the input to be heart. Drag a copy of this after the switch costume to heart 1 block. Add a set this type to none block to the start of the script and another set this type to none block between the first repeat 3 times loop and the switch costume to coin block. Then set this type to score before the switch costume to 1 block. Then go to the when I start as a clone script and attach a forever loop. Add an if else function into this with the condition this type is equal to heart and add another if else function into the if portion. Set the condition to be lives is less than this value. In the if portion, switch costume to heart 2, else switch costume to heart 1. Duplicate the this type is equal to heart else function and change the condition to be this type is equal to score. Put this into the pre-existing empty else function. Then create a new block called display value and then add a number or text input value. Select run without screen refresh and click OK. Move the switch costume to heart 2 block from the if portion of the if lives is less than this value function and add a letter blank of blank operator into the input space. Set this to be letter this value of value. Change the condition of the if lives is less than this value else function to be if score is greater than 999 and in the if portion display 999. Duplicate this function. Change the condition of the copy to be score is less than 10 and set the value of the display block to join 0 0 score. Remove the switch costume to heart 1 block from the pre-existing else space and add our new function in its place. Duplicate the if score is less than 10 function and change the condition of the copy to be score is less than 100. We need the display value in the if portion to be join 0 score. Remove the switch costume to heart 1 block from the pre-existing else space and drag our new function into there. Remove the switch costume to heart 1 block from the else space and replace it with a display block with the value set to score. Find the when I receive mouse run message receiver and at the start of this set lives to 3 and score to 0. Now we need to make a new variable for all sprites called game state. Set this to 0 under the when I receive mouse run message receiver, then drag in a when this sprite is clicked block and attach an if else function to this with the condition costume name is equal to start. In the if portion, set game state to 1. Duplicate this if else function. Remove the set game state block and add it into the empty else function under the when I start as a clone script. Drag an if else function into the empty if space and set the condition to be if touching mouse pointer. In the if portion, set size to 110, else set it to 100, and in the if portion, set brightness to 10, else set it to 0. Go to the when this sprite is clicked script and add a hide block after the change game state block. Go back to the when I start as a clone script and add an if else function into the empty else space. Set the condition to be costume name contains arrow and then add an if function into the if portion of the function. Set the condition to be if game state is equal to 1 and then copy the if touching mouse pointer else function from the if this type is equal to start function and drag that into our new if function. Then go to the icon sprite and duplicate the when I receive message 1 script that spawns the icon for Whack-a-Bug and change the wait until open is equal to Whack-a-Bug condition and the wait until not open is equal to Whack-a-Bug condition to wait until open is equal to mouse run and wait until not open is equal to mouse run respectively. Then go to the when I start as a clone script and duplicate the if open is equal to Whack-a-Bug function. Change the condition of this to be if open is equal to mouse run and the condition of the inner if else function from lives is equal to 0 to game state is equal to 0. Add a go to front layer block to the start of the forever loop. Then go to the money sprite and under the when I start as a clone script add a go to front layer block to the start of the forever loop. We're now going to make a new block called show money with run without screen refresh selected, and we're going to drag one of the if not costume name is equal to bar functions and attach this to our define script. Replace the other if not costume name is equal to bar function with the new function. Then duplicate the if open is equal to Whack-a-Bug function and change the condition to be if open is equal to mouse run. Remove the contents of the pre-existing if open is equal to Whack-a-Bug functions else portion and drag in our new function. Change the if lives is equal to 0 condition condition to be if game state is equal to 0, and add a show money block to the if portions of both the if open is equal to whack-a-bug and if open is equal to mouse run functions. The initial screen for the game is now all set up. Go back to the mouse run sprite and find the clone define script. We need a set this type block with it being set to mouse, and to this attach a switch costume to mouse 1 block and a go to xy block with the values x0, y minus 25. Then create clone of myself. Attach these 4 blocks to the end of our clone define script. Find the when I start as a clone script and add an if function into the empty else space. Set the condition to be this type is equal to mouse and drag an if else function into the condition space. This one with the condition game state is equal to 1. In the if portion, show, else, hide. In the else portion, set this value to 2. Add a switch costume block to the if portion and drag a join operator into the input space. Set the left hand side to be mouse, and for the right, add an addition operator with one side of this being 1. Then drag in a mod operator. Set the first input of this to be round and the second to be 5. Drag this into the empty input of the addition operator. Drag a multiplication operator into the round operator input space and set this to be timer times 5 to animate the mouse. Drag in an if function and then drag a not operator into the condition space. Drag an equals operator into that and set the left hand side to be x position. Drag this function into the if portion of the if game state is equal to 1 else function. Drag in a multiplication operator and set the left hand side to 147. Drag a subtraction operator into the right hand side and set this to be this value minus 2. Drag this into the right hand side of the x position is equal to operator. Drag in a change x by block and drag a multiplication operator into the input space. Set the right hand side to be 2. Drag a divide operator into the left and drag an abs of or absolute value of operator into the right hand side of that. Drag in a minus operator and set the left hand side to be x position. For the right, copy the 147 times this value minus 2 calculation from the if function condition and drag that in. Add a copy of this new equation into both the empty input spaces within the change x by block and drag that into the empty if function. And actually this needs to be multiplied by minus 2, not 2, sorry. Drag in an if function and copy the abs of x position minus 147 times this value minus 2 operator from the change x by block. Set this aside for a sec and drag a less than operator into the if function's condition space. Set the right hand side to 5, drag our abs operator into the left. Put this function after the change x by block, add in a set x2 block and set the input to be 147 times this value minus 2. And the mouse was moving a bit too slowly for me, so I changed the minus 2 in the change x by block to minus 5, although I do change this again later. Play around with it, do whatever feels right. Drag in another when I start as a clone block and attach a forever loop to this. Encase the loop within an if function and set the condition to be if this type is equal to mouse. Add another if function into the loop and set the condition to be if game state is equal to 1. Add an if else function into this and set the condition to an equals operator. Set the right hand side to minus 1. Drag a minus operator into the left and add an or operator into each side of this. We need this to read if key right arrow pressed or key D pressed minus key left arrow pressed or key A pressed equals minus 1, then drag an if function into the if portion of this and set the condition to be this value is greater than 1. Within the function, change x by minus 1. After the if function, add a wait until block. Drag a not operator into this and then duplicate the condition of the if else function that detects the keyboard inputs and drag that in. Duplicate this if else function and set it aside. Add in an if function to the empty else space and then drag the condition and content of the if else function that we just set aside into that. Change the minus 1 in the condition space and the wait until block to 1 and change the condition of the inner if statement from this value is greater than 1 to this value is less than 3 and set the value of the change x by block to 1. Go to the other when I start as a clone script and find the if costume name contains arrow part of the script. In the if portion of the if touching mouse pointer else function, set mouse over to costume name. Add an if function into the else portion and set the condition of this to be if mouse over is equal to costume name. In this, set mouse over to none. Go back to the other when I start as a clone script where we're controlling the mouse's movement and drag in an and operator. Set the left hand side of this to be mouse over is equal to right arrow and the other side to mouse down. Copy this into the right hand side of an or operator and drag the a key right arrow pressed or key D pressed operator from the if else function's condition into the left. Drag this into the now empty input space in the condition and replace any example of key right arrow pressed or key D pressed with a copy of it. I actually missed one when I did this at first. I'll fix that in just a mo. Go back to the copy of the mouse over is equal to right arrow and mouse down condition that we left unused earlier and change the mouse over is equal to condition to be mouse over is equal to left arrow. Drag this into the right hand side of an OR operator and drag a key left arrow pressed or key A pressed operator from the if else condition into the left. Drag this into the now empty input space and replace any instance of key left arrow pressed or key A pressed with our new operator. And this is where I noticed that I missed one of the key right arrow pressed or key D pressed and fixed it. We can now move the mouse with either the keyboard or by clicking the buttons on the screen. Now go to the when this sprite is clicked script, and where we set game state to 1, we also want to set difficulty to 1. Then go to the clone define script. Duplicate the final 4 blocks of this and remove the switch costume block. Change the set this type block to set this type to spawner and set the Y value of the go to XY block to 155. Attach this to the end of our clone define script. Go to the first when I start as a clone script and transfer the condition and contents of the if this type is equal to mouse function into the condition space and if portion of an if else function respectively. Drag an if else function into the else portion of that and then drag this function into the now empty else space within our main script. Set the condition of the blank if else function to be if this type is equal to spawner in the if portion hide. Then add a repeat loop and set the condition to be game state is equal to 0. Add a wait blank seconds block into this and set the value of this to be 10 divided by difficulty. Drag in a set x2 block and drag a multiplication operator into the input space. Set this to 147 times pick random minus 2 to 1. Drag this in after the wait block. Drag in an if else function and add an equals operator into the condition space. Set the right hand side to 1 and drag this new function in after the set x block. Set the left hand side of the conditions equals operator to pick random 1 to 3. In the if portion, set this type to pickup, else set this type to enemy. After the function, create clone of myself and then set this type back to spawner. Encase everything after the wait block in an if function and set the condition to be if game state is equal to 1. Drag an if else function into the empty else function. Set the condition to be this type is equal to pickup. In the if portion, go to back layer, show and switch costume to coin. Add in a change y by block and set the value of this to be difficulty times by minus 2. Then add an if function after that, and for the condition, drag in a touching color sensor block and use the eyedropper to select the dark grey outline color for the mouse. Drag a delete this clone block into the function as well as a change score by 1 block before the delete this clone block. Drag another if function in after the if touching color function and drag an or operator into the condition space. Set one side to game state is equal to 0 and the other to y position is less than minus 106. Within this function, delete this clone. Drag an if function into the empty else space and set the condition to be this type is equal to enemy. Copy the entire contents of the if portion of the if this type is equal to pickup else function and drag it into our empty if function. Change the costume to be enemy. Instead of change score by 1, we need it to be change lives by minus 1. Add an if function between the change lives block and the delete this clone block and drag an equals operator into the condition space. Set the right hand side of this to 0. Within the function, set game state to 0 and set the left of the equals operator to be lives. And on testing it felt a bit slow, so under the if this type is equal to spawner condition, I changed the wait block from 10 over difficulty to 5 over difficulty. Go to the other when I started a clone block that controls the mouse's movement. Attach an if function to the end with the condition costume name is equal to start. Within this, add a forever loop and drag a wait until block into that. Set the condition to be game state is equal to 1. Add a repeat loop after this with the condition game state is equal to 0. Within this loop, wait 5 seconds and change the difficulty by 0.2. And it felt like the mouse was still moving a bit too slowly, so in the other when I started the clone script under the this type is equal to mouse condition, I played around with the multiplier and the change x by block with it eventually winding up at minus 10. And whatever value you put this at, you want the right hand side of the less than operator for the following if function to be the positive version of. So if you're multiplying the movement by minus 10, then this should read as less than 10. Then go to the when the sprite is clicked script and add a wait until block after the hide block with the condition game state is equal to 0. Then show. Go back to the first when I start as a clone script and drag in an if function. Set the condition to be if not open is equal to mouse run and within the function delete this clone. Drag the this function into the start of the forever loop, and back in the when this sprite is clicked script where we set game state and difficulty, we also want to set lives to 3. And one small thing I forgot to do earlier, go back to the icon sprite and find the when this sprite is clicked script. Drag in an OR operator and set one side to be another OR operator. We need one condition to be open is equal to whack-a-bug, one to be open is equal to mouse run, and we can preemptively set the third to be open is equal to insect invaders, as we're about to code that game anyway. Put this in the place of the open is equal to whack-a-bug condition in the pre-existing script. And with that, we're done with mouse run. Great job, you've done so much. Now let's move on to insect invaders, which is of course inspired by Space Invaders, where you're shooting enemies that descend from the top of the screen. We are of course starting with the artwork, so skip to the timestamp if you're not interested. I recolored the mouse run backdrop to use the Insect Invaders color palette and remove the lanes from the screen as those are no longer needed. This game actually reuses quite a few assets from mouse run, so I actually just duplicated the sprite and recolored any assets that I would need to fit this game's blue and yellow design, which saved me a lot of time over creating the art from scratch, but there's still a few things that I did need to make. I needed 2 new enemy designs, which I modified from those on the front of the arcade machine sprite, and I also designed a bullet which looks like a chunk of cheese, as well as UI to indicate when your gun has reloaded. But onto the code, and this might start to feel a smidge familiar by now. Add in a when green flag is click block and attach a hide block to this. Then drag in a when I receive message receiver and set this to new message insect invaders, not insect invasion as I initially did. Then make a custom block called clone with run without screen refresh selected. Attach a clone block to our message receiver. Then create 2 new variables, both for this sprite only, called this type and this value. Under the clone define script, set this type to none and switch costume to frame. Then add a go to XY block with the values x0, y0. Then create clone of myself. Duplicate the last 3 blocks and change the costume block to be switch costume to start. Attach this to our clone define script and change the y value of the go to block to be 35. Then drag in a when I start as a clone script and attach a show block to this. And this is where I noticed that I'd used the wrong message in the message receiver and corrected it. Duplicate everything from switch costume to start and set the x value in the go to block to be -203. Set the costume to be bullet UI 0 and attach a set this type block to the start of this, with it being set to bullet UI. Attach this to our clone define script. We also want to set the y value of the go to XY block to be -123. Duplicate everything from set this type to bullet UI. In these new blocks, we want to set this type to none, to switch costume to coin, and to go to x87, y -128, although I do alter the x value in just a little bit. Attach these blocks to the end of our clone define script. Drag in a change x by block and set the value of the input to be 40. We also need a set this type to score block and a switch costume to 1 block, and attach all 3 of these to the clone define script. Drag in a repeat loop, repeating 3 times, and within this loop create clone of myself. Before this though, we need a set this value to 1 block, although I accidentally put this type instead of this value, so do as I say, not as I do. And then attach the repeat loop. Within this loop, we also need to change x by 25 and change this value by 1. And here I changed the x value in the last go to xy block, eventually settling on 120. Duplicate everything from the go to xy block and then separate the go to block from the rest of the code. Attach this go to block to the clone define script and set the values to x -25, y -155 for now, although again I do wind up tweaking the x value. Then take the set this type block from the code we copied earlier and attach that, changing it to be set this type to heart. Then attach the repeat 3 times loop from the copied code, and we can just discard the rest. We also want to switch costume to heart 1 block between the go to and set this type blocks, and we want to set the change x by block within the repeat loop to 35. I also changed the x value in the go to xy block to -20. Then go back to the mouse run sprite and find the display define script. Copy that into the insect invader sprite by dragging it from the workspace into the sprite. We want to do the same for the longer of the 2 when I start as a clone scripts. Back in the insect invader sprite, find the when I start as a clone script that we just copied in and change the condition of the first if statement from if not open is equal to mouse run to if not open is equal to insect invaders. This is where I realized that I'd set this type to 0 instead of this value and fixed it. Under the when I receive insect invaders message receiver, we want to set score to 0 and lives to 3. Back with the when I start as a clone script, scroll down until you find the costume name contains arrow if else statement. Remove this from the rest of the script and move everything from the else statement back into its place. Discard the now orphaned if else statement. Repeat this process for the if this type is equal to pick up if else function. We now want to go to the icon sprite and duplicate the when I receive message 1 script that spawns the icon for mouse run. Change the wait until open is equal to mouse run condition and the wait until not open is equal to mouse run condition to wait until open is equal to insect invaders and wait until not open is equal to insect invaders respectively. Then go to the when I started a clone script and drag in an OR operator. Set one side to be open is equal to insect invaders and for the other move the open is equal to mouse run condition from the pre-existing script into here. Drag this new operator into the now empty condition space. Then go back to the mouse run sprite and copy the when this sprite is clicked script into the insect invaders sprite, again by simply dragging it over. We also want to go to the money sprite and to find the when I started a clone script. Drag in an OR operator and set one side to be open is equal to insect invaders and again for the other move the open is equal to mouse run condition from the pre-existing script into here. Drag this new operator into the now empty condition space. Back in the insect invaders sprite, I realized that I'd forgotten to reset this value before spawning in the hearts, so under the clone define script I added in a set this value to 1 block before the final repeat loop. Now make a new variable for all sprites called cooldown. We want this to be set to 0 both under the when I receive insect invaders message receiver and in the when the sprite is clicked script within the if portion of the if costume name is equal to start else function. Then go to the bottom of the when I started a clone script and move the this type is equal to enemy condition and the contents of the function into the condition space and if portion respectively of a new if else function and replace the now empty if function with this. Drag an if function into the empty else space and set the condition of this to be this type is equal to bullet UI. Drag in a switch costume 2 block and for the input drag in a join operator. Set the left of this to be bullet UI and drag a subtraction operator into the right. Set this to be 5 minus cooldown and drag this block into the empty if function. Go to the end of our clone define script. Attach a set this type to mouse block to the end of this. We also need a go to XY block and a switch costume 2 block. Set the values of the go to block to x0 y minus 32 and set the switch costume block to be switch costume to mouse 1. Then go to the when I started a clone script and find the portion under the if this type is equal to mouse function. Remove everything except the show block from the if portion of the if game state is equal to 1 else function and remove the set this value to 2 block from the else portion. Drag a set x2 block into the if portion and for the input drag in a mouse x sensor input. Then drag in an if function with the condition x position is less than minus 174 and within the condition set x to minus 174. Below this add another if function, this time with the condition x position is greater than 174 and within the function set x to 174. And I realized that we forgot to actually make the mouse clone, so add a create clone of myself block to the end of the clone define script. We also need to set game state to 0 under the when I receive insect invaders message receiver. Add in another when I started a clone script and add an if function to this with the condition this type is equal to mouse. Add a forever loop into this and in this loop add a wait until block. Drag an and operator into the condition space and for the first space of this set it to game state is equal to 1 and for the second drag in a not operator and drag a mouse down sensor into the condition space of that. Then add a repeat until block with the condition game state is equal to 0. Add an if function into that with the condition mouse down and in the function add another if function with the condition cooldown is equal to 0. Within this function set cooldown to 5 and set this type to bullet. Then create clone of myself and set this type back to mouse. After the if function wait until not mouse down, then go to the bottom of the longer when I started a clone script and move the condition and contents of the if this type is equal to bullet UI to the condition and if portion of an if else function. Move the now empty if function into the else portion of this and place this into the now empty else space of the pre-existing code. Set the condition of this to if this type is equal to bullet and within this function go to back layer, switch costume to bullet and change y by 5. Then add an if function with the condition y position is greater than 165. Within this function delete this clone. Go to the other when I started a clone script and duplicate all of the code attached to it. Change the if this type is equal to mouse condition to be if this type is equal to bullet UI and attach this to the end of the pre-existing script. Remove the contents of the forever loop and add in a wait until block in its place. Then set the condition to be not cooldown is equal to 0. Then add a repeat until loop and set the condition to cooldown is equal to 0. Within this loop wait 0.2 seconds and change cooldown by -1. Then go to the clone define script and duplicate the final 4 blocks. Remove the switch costume to mouse 1 1 block and change the set this type block to read set this type to spawner. Attach this to our clone define script. Then go to the longer when I start as a clone script and find the section under if this type is equal to spawner. Within this, change the set this type to pick up block to set this value to 2 and change the set this type to enemy block to set this value to 1. Then remove the create clone of myself block from below the if else function into the if portion. Add an if else function into the else portion and set the condition to be if pick random 0 to 10 is less than difficulty. Add a set x to blank block into the if portion and set the input to be minus 140. Then make a new block, call it spawn enemies spacing, and then add a number or text input called spacing, then add a label called number, then add a number or text input number. Make sure run without screen refresh is selected and click OK. Drag a copy of this after our set x2 block. Within this, set spacing to 70 and number to 5. Then drag in a repeat loop with the number of repeats being the number input. Attach this to our spawn enemies define script. Within this loop, create clone of myself and change x by spacing. Back in the when I start as a clone script, duplicate the if pick random 0 to 10 is less than difficulty else function and drag this into the empty else space. Change the condition to be pick random 0 to 7, change the set x value to minus 85, change the spacing input to 85, not minus 85 as I initially set it to, and change the number input to 3. And in the empty else function, set x to 0 and create clone of myself. Go down to the if this type is equal to enemy part of the script and remove the touch and color sensor. Replace it with the y position is less than minus 106 from the subsequent if function. For that if function, set the condition to just be if game state is equal to 0. Back up at the if this type is equal to spawner part of the script. I forgot to set this type to enemy, which we need to do before the if pick random 1 to 3 is equal to 1 function. And under the clone define script, we need to set the y value of the final go to xy block to 150. But back in the when I start as a clone script, under the if this type is equal to enemy section, we need another if statement. Drag an equals operator into the condition space and add a this value input into the left hand side. Move this in after the show block and before the change y by block. Set the left hand side of the condition operator to 2. Within this function, add a set x to blank block and drag a multiplication operator into the condition space. Set one side of this to be 176. Drag a sign operator into the other, and into this drag a multiplication operator. I actually code this wrong at first. We need it to read timer by difficulty by 2 and I forgot the timer multiplication. I'll fix this later, bear with me once again. Back up at the if this type is equal to spawner part of the script, drag in a multiplication operator. Set one side to 85 and the other to pick random minus 1 to 1. Drag this into the input space of the set x to 0 block. Back under the if this type is equal to enemy section, drag in an if function. Drag a touch and color sensor into the condition space and use the eyedropper to select the outline color on the bullet costume. Within the function, change score by 1 and delete this clone. Drag it in after the if game state is equal to 0 function, and this is where I added the timer multiplication that I forgot earlier. I also changed the number it was multiplied by from 2 to 5, and under the when I start as a clone script, under the if this type is equal to bullet UI section, I changed the value of the wait until block from 0.2 to 0.05. Now go to the mouse run sprite and find the shorter of the two when I start as a clone script. Copy the if costume name is equal to start function from this by dragging it into the insect invaders sprite. Go back to said insect invaders sprite and attach it to the shorter when I start as a clone script. Another small bug we need to fix, go to the other when I start as a clone script and find the if this type is equal to enemy section. Drag in an and operator and set one side to y position is greater than minus 70. Drag the touch and color sensor into the other side and drag the new and operator into the now empty condition space to make sure that the enemies don't think that the lives or score UI is a bullet. And under the if this type is equal to bullet section, we need another if statement after the if y position is greater than 165 function. Set the condition to be if game state is equal to 0 and within the function delete this clone. Under the when this sprite is clicked script where we set all of the other variables, we also need to set score to 0. And one last thing I forgot to do, go to the when I start as a clone script and find the if this type is equal to enemy section. Drag in an if function and drag a not operator into the condition space. Drag a blank contains blank operator into that, setting this to be costume name contains enemy. Within the function add a switch costume 2 block and add a join operator into the input of this. Set this to be join enemy pick random 1 to 3 and put this in the place of the switch costume 2 block in the pre-existing existing code. And with that, we're done with Insect Invaders. However, there are a few bugs in the work we've done so far today that I only caught while editing this video, so let's quickly go back and fix those, shall we? In the Whack-a-Bug sprite, go to the when this sprite is clicked script and remove the 2 next costume blocks. Instead, put in a switch costume to bug A3 block. This stops an odd jitter in the animation. Then, in mouse run, under the when this sprite is clicked script, we want to set score to 0 when we set all of the other variables. But now let's go through and add in some sounds. And for now, I'm just going to be using sounds from the Scratch library because they're pretty good and will serve the purposes of demonstration today. If you're using the project template that I've supplied, all of the sounds are already in there for you to use. In the arcade machine, add a start sound pop block to the when this sprite is clicked script, then go to Whack-a-Bug. Under the when this sprite clicked script, in the if portion of the if else function, start sound pop. Then add a start sound suction cut block into the if portion within the else portion of the statement. Under the when I receive start game script, find the part of the script that changes lives by -1 and add in a start sound crunch block in above that. And in the longer when I start as a clone script, add a start sound lose block to the start of the if this type is equal to earn section. Now let's go to the mouse run sprite. Add a start sound pop block into the if portion of the if else function under the when this sprite is clicked script. Under the shorter when I start as a clone block, add a start sound pop block wherever we change this value. In the other, start sound crunch when we change lives by -1. And in the if this type is equal to pickup section, start sound collect when we change score by 1. And back in the when this sprite is clicked script, add a start sound lose block to the end of the if portion of the if else function. And under the shorter when I start as a clone block, I actually changed the pop sounds to low whoosh. In Insect Invaders, under the when this sprite is clicked script, add a start sound pop block to the start of the if portion of the if else function. And under the shorter when I start as a clone function, start sound pew before the create clone of myself block. And in the other when I start as a clone script, under the if this type is equal to enemy section, start sound crunch when we change lives by -1 and start sound pop when we change lives by 1. And back in the when this sprite clicked script, add a start sound lose block to the end of the if portion of the if else function. And while this isn't something we added today, it was bugging me that the play button on the main menu didn't have a sound, so I added a start sound pop to the when this sprite is clicked script in the play button sprite. And one final bug I noticed that we need to fix, go to the mouse run sprite and find the when this sprite is clicked script. Add a change money by score block to the end of the if portion of the if else function. Do the same in the Insect Invaders sprite. And after that mammoth of a video, we are finally done. Well done if you made it this far. I know that was a lot, so thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you did, it lets me know there's something to see more of. Join the Discord, link down below, and I'll see you next week with another video. Bye!